Um, Welcome back, everyone, from the break. And it's really an honor to host this special session, the session on the Hematology Oncology Research Special Interest Group of IOTIC. Welcome, everyone, and I hope you're going to enjoy it.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nomo Ndembatani. I'm with Rakia Saidu. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our facilitator for this session, and that's Professor Christopher Williams, who we know as one of the founders of AORTIC. And Professor Williams is a clinical hematologist and has worked hand in hand to create the AORTIC that we have nowadays. It's unfortunate that we missed all other founding members, such as Dr. Victor Ngu from Cameroon, Dr. Toniola Solanke, and Mr. and Mrs. James Holland, who all passed away. So it's over to you, and a great honor, Christopher Williams, that you have agreed to be the facilitator for this session. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for the introduction. It is my honor to welcome everybody else to this 2-hour symposium on hematological malignancies in Africa. I am speaking to you from the city of Victoria, which is on the Pacific coast of Canada, where it is now just about 3 a.m. in the morning. It is my intention to make a few remarks based mainly on my personal work experience in Africa some 4 decades ago, quite a long time ago. Just trying to get this. Okay. Now, from these population pyramids, it is clear that Africa is a continent of young people, with about 70% of the population being less than 30 years of age. Now, the situation is totally different in Europe, where about 70% of the people are above the age of 30 years. So, inverse relationship when it comes to age. Because of the young age of Africans, most of the cancers among Africans are actually highly treatable and curable. And this includes leukemias and lymphomas, as well as germ cell tumors. In Europe, on the other hand, more treatment-resistant cancers like breast cancer, prostate cancer, colorectal cancer, and melanoma are the predominant cancers. In terms of, in terms of cancer patterns and availability of management facilities, there are 3 major regions in Africa. The Mediterranean area, which has a very strong European influence. Then we have the sub-Saharan Africa with widespread deficiencies in technological development. And then there is South Africa, of course, the southern region of the continent, with extremes of socioeconomic inequalities and more advanced infrastructures. Environmental factors and lifestyle influences play a role in cancer patterns in the regions in different ways. For instance, in West Africa and Nigeria, we did a study of a space-time distribution of childhood leukemia lymphoma cases in the Nigerian city of Ibadan, which in the 80s had a population of about 1 million people. Burkitt's lymphoma cases predominated in the overcrowded, filthy, city area populated by socioeconomically disadvantaged people. Whereas acute lymphoblastic leukemia, on the other hand, was more common in the more affluent locales where better educated people lived. Treatment outcomes to similar cancers appear to vary in the regions. For instance, childhood acute lymphoblastic leukemia appears to be more resistant to treatment in the less developed countries of Africa and Asia when compared to results from Europe and the United States. It is not quite clear whether this is due to treatment qualities or biological characteristics of the disease in the various regions. Risk factors to cancer vary remarkably. In this slide here, one can see that Africa is a major focus in the global epidemiology of the virus called human T-cell T lymphotropic virus type 1, or otherwise referred to as HTLV1, which was discovered in the United States in 1979 in the blood of a Black man living in Florida. It is the causative agent for ATL, adult leukemia lymphoma, an aggressive lymphoma subtype that is seen in sub-Saharan Africa, especially here in West Africa, and is also seen in other parts of African diaspora, like the West Indies and the southern parts of the United States. Environmental pressures in sub-Saharan Africa resulted in the emergence of sickle cell gene as a protective response to the lethality of severe falciparum malaria infection. More and more, we're realizing that predisposition to a number of cancer types is being observed in a number of cancers among people of the African diaspora. This includes breast cancer and multiple myeloma. This tempting to suggest that this may also be due to some genomic aberrations which might have emerged in the African population in much the same way as the sickle cell gene did. So I would think that this is an indication that there is a need for increased genomic screening studies on the continent. Unfortunately, only about 2% of human genomes mapped globally up to now are related to Africa, and most of these have been observed in African Americans. So we are lucky to have 5 experts from various parts of the continent today, as well as the African diaspora, who have been kind enough to share their experience in their various regions with us. So I'm looking forward very much to their presentation. Hopefully we'll be able to find some ways of collaborating further. I was just discussing with Professor Ralph before this meeting, so how we can make progress. Now, I would like to suggest that all speakers should be aware of the fact that they are being timed very closely. You have only 20 minutes for your presentation. I would prefer not to interrupt anybody. And so with that, I would like to hand over the meeting to the coordinators, and we can now go on to have the next presentation. Thank you. What's going on? Hello?
Yes, sir.
I'm done with my presentation. Who is the...
So the next
The next
Paul.
presenter is going to
Paul
be
Raff.
Dr. Stephen. Is Dr. Stephen around?
Power failure in South Africa, and I suspect the two speakers, Dr. Christine Stefan and Dr. Paul Raff, may be having some electrical glitches there.
Oh
So
my
maybe
God,
we
I was
could-
just talking with Dr. Raff.
Was it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just talking with them.
I'm okay for now.
Oh,
So
there he is.
we're okay.
So we don't have Dr. Stephen, do we? Hello?
So why don't
Maybe proceed to the next speaker.
Yeah, but what about Dr. Durosimi? Is he around? Dr. Durosimi of Nigeria. Do we have him on the line? Also not. Oh, okay.
Dr. Williams?
Yes, please.
Hi, it's Lisa Newman. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I actually have an overlapping session a little bit later, so I'd be happy to do my presentation earlier if you'd like, if that would help.
This is Lisa, right?
Yes, hi. Lisa.
Oh, hi, how are you, Lisa?
Good
Okay,
to see
well,
you.
if we are ready, Lisa, I think we'll just, I was hoping that we would have other, okay, so now since you say you're
Whatever
gonna.
you think. I'm just volunteering, but whatever you think, Dr. Williams, I will go with.
I see Dr. Ruff is back with us. Paul, are you ready to take over?
Yes, I can do that if you
So,
want.
well, if you don't, Lisa, let's have Dr. Ruff, and then if you let me know if your time is pressing too hard, then we might let's have Dr. Ruff now, and then we'll see how it goes. Okay, Dr. Ruff, now if I could just introduce Dr. Ruff very briefly. He's a professor of medical oncology at the University of Witwatersrand, is that correct? In Johannesburg, in South Africa. He has mentored many oncologists in several African countries, and he has served for several years as the African representative of on the International Affairs Committee of ASCO, the American Society of Clinical Oncology. And we're very fortunate to have him today to give us some a presentation on his experience in myeloma and lymphoma in low and middle income countries. So Paul, please take it over from there.
Thanks very much. Can everyone see my screen? And so I'll start, as Chris said, and I must just thank Chris for inviting me to give this presentation. I've known Christopher for probably 20 years now.
Oh, a long time.
And joined him with the first aortic meeting in Accra, Ghana in 2003. So it goes back a long time, and I think things have changed a lot since then. And so I'm wearing a number of hats as the head of medical oncology at the University of Witwatersrand, and also from the point of view of being the chairperson of the South African Health Products Regulatory Authority Clinical Trials Committee, the National Research Quaternary Essential Medicine List Committee, and the Ministerial Advisory Committee on Cancer Control and Prevention. Now, South Africa, as everyone knows, is part of SADC, and SADC consists of 15 countries. The South African population of 60 million out of a total of 220 million people in SADC. SADC occupies almost 10 million square kilometers, and they're all low middle income countries, although they vary from low income to upper middle income. South Africa is actually upper middle income country. But the problem is that the citizens of the SADC region do not have equitable access to quality assured, safe, effective and affordable essential medicines in the treatment of cancer and especially hematological malignancy. That's just a map that everyone knows, just to show SADC stretching from the Indian Ocean Islands across a large part of southern Africa. Now, to start off looking at regulatory issues, because without good regulation, you don't really get anywhere. And there are a number of factors that low-middle income countries that affect the regulatory approval of medicines. And I have a number of them here from all over the world. And the ones that really are applicable in our environment are the regulatory approval times, although this is improving quite significantly at one stage. The approval of a new chemical entity in oncology could take up to 7 years. Today, and I think COVID has had a very good effect on this. It's pushed everything rapidly forward, and we're now getting down to under a year. So this has been a big improvement, but it has been tough. The issue of technical expertise has always been a problem because our regulatory authority is reliant on external experts, because we don't have enough internal people. Some of the others like electronic supporters today, I think, been largely superseded, although bandwidth for these type of meetings can be a problem. And then the other issues such as intellectual property and pricing. So there are issues from the pharmaceutical side. There are also issues seen by the actual regulatory authorities themselves, including lack of resources, lack of IT, although that is improving. Lack of reviewers, as I mentioned, is a problem, and it's very difficult in most countries outside the US where the FDA employs full-time people to have full-time people working for a regulatory authority. And we rely on external experts, which is difficult when people have their own day jobs. Although we have quite a few people who are sort of post-retirement who work in this environment, which is useful, but you also have to develop young up-and-coming people as well. Now, as I mentioned, South Africa, we have SAHPRA, South African Health Products Regulatory Authority, that's responsible for health product regulation, includes medicines, devices, and RVDs. This was founded on 1st of February 2018 and replaced the old Medicines Control Council that only did medicines, and the National Department of Health. This is a semi-independent body that works on its own as a sort of parastatal organization. And I think the switch, after some initial teething problems, has had a huge improvement on the regulatory process of medicines, and especially cancer medicines. And a large number of new cancer medicines have been registered of late. Obviously, COVID has had an effect on this, but in fact, there's been positive effects because we now have meetings far more often. We used to meet every 2 months. Now we can meet all the time. It gets a bit intrusive on your life, but we have meetings sort of nights, weekends, wherever, and having virtual meetings. So things has improved. And I think the whole COVID experience, although being awful, has actually had a very positive effect on the whole, improving the regulatory process. Now that's just a quick organogram showing that SAHPRA has a board and a CEO and expert committees that evaluate medicines, trials, registration, devices, diagnostics, also radiation, radiopharmaceuticals, which is an area that needs a lot of work. Now, cancer in low-middle income countries is becoming more and more important as the world population ages. Less people die of communicable diseases. There's more cancer. And this is especially true in low-middle income countries such as South Africa. And this has been in large part due to a significant reduction in death due to HIV/AIDS because of the large antiretroviral program that we have. And we know that IOC reported of 18 million new cancer patients in 2018. I didn't update this for 2020. But unfortunately, the mortality rate remains extremely high. And this is especially the case in low-middle income countries. So we're starting to see more and more cancer, but the problem is becoming more and more difficult. One of the interesting problems with the that we're seeing two types of cancers. We're seeing the sort of specific age-related malignancies like cervical cancer, lymphomas, Kaposi's. But the other thing which is becoming a major issue are the so-called age-associated malignancies, or HIV-associated malignancies like breast and lung, and which is becoming an important issue as people are living longer. We're also seeing these in HIV-positive individuals at a far younger age than with other HIV non-infected individuals, and appear to have a more aggressive course. And there's a lot of work being done on this. And this, as we can see here, cancer is a second biggest cause of death from non-communicable diseases in South Africa. And this is a bit old, and this is going to get worse and worse. And this will be the case in all low middle income countries. Now, the 21st century has been the development of targeted therapies, and that's one I wanted to concentrate on. What we access that we do and don't have: monoclonal antibodies, signal transduction inhibitor, IMiDs, proteasome inhibitors, immune therapy. And the problem is that in low middle income countries, you have limited access due to regulatory constraints, lack of skills and resources, high costs, lack of harmonization, obviously the impact of infectious diseases, especially HIV/AIDS. Now, South Africa, unfortunately, has a two-tier healthcare system with about 85% of the population depending on the public sector, 15% have private sector insurance. And these patients have access to a fairly large number of the new targeted therapies in hematological malignancies. And I've listed all the ones that are available here, which is not dissimilar to what you'll get in North America and Europe. Unfortunately, however, in the public sector, it's not the same thing. And the only new targeted therapies in hematological malignancies that are available remain rituximab, thalidomide, and bortezomib, very recently approved, and in CML, imatinib and nilotinib. So we have a long way to go before the majority of the population have access to all these new treatments. And then the really new things, CAR T cells and BiTEs haven't arrived here at all. And the big problem, which is going to make these type of therapies extremely difficult, even with insured patients, is the huge costs, which are completely unaffordable by even the wealthiest in this country. Now, monoclonal antibodies, we all know about. They were first developed in the 70s by Kohler and Milstein, who won a Nobel Prize for Physiology and Medicine in 1984. Initially had limited therapeutic efficacy due to the rate of human anti-mouse antibodies, but the development of first chimeric, then humanized, and now fully human monoclonals has improved their ability to be used in patients significantly. And as everyone knows, these agents are used in all sorts of cancers, and in fact outside cancer, playing a massive role in rheumatology, and of course now we've seen it in COVID as well. Rituximab is the only one that we have access to. Everyone knows this is a chimeric anti-CD20 monoclonal that activates cytotoxicity and antibody-dependent complement-mediated cytotoxicity and antibody-dependent cellular cytotoxicity. It has direct anti-tumor effects and is synergistic with chemotherapy. And the landmark study by Bertrand Coiffier, published in New England Journal of Medicine in 2002, showed that the addition of rituximab to standard CHOP has a significant impact. And fortunately, this is the one agent that we've had access to for patients in the public sector for 10 years now, or 9 years, since 2012. And so it has had a major impact that patients with diffuse large B-cell lymphoma have been getting rituximab in the South African Public Healthcare Service, which has been an important addition. Unfortunately, however, it's only restricted to diffuse large B-cell lymphoma and is not yet approved for other B-cell lymphomas such as CLL, follicular lymphomas, even mantle cell, although people do use it. And we're trying to expand its usage, but there are significant cost issues. But fortunately, we now have the advent of biosimilars in the last year or so that hopefully will bring the prices down and make this more available to everybody. But I think, at least we can do that, because to treat non-Hodgkin's lymphomas without rituximab is really inappropriate. So this is one sort of small success we've had, but we still have everybody gets access to this agent. The other problem is in HIV positive individuals, officially this isn't approved, although we're trying to push it now, especially with the advent of good antiretrovirals and patients being very well immune reconstituted. Now, the other ones that are available are the signal transduction inhibitors. Everyone knows imatinib. This isn't quite lymphoid, but still, you know, imatinib was probably the biggest breakthrough in oncology in the last 60 years, and has led the way, together with rituximab as a monoclonal, with STIs being the sort of, have changed everything in oncology. Now, imatinib, we all know, based on the IRIS study by Stephen O'Brien, published in New England Journal of Medicine also in 2002, showed a significant advantage of imatinib versus the old interferon cytarabine, and has become the standard of care. This was available to all patients in many parts of the world through the GPAP or LEVIC International Patient Access Program run by Novartis, but was closed when generics became available. And in South Africa, this carried on till the end of 2014. But since then, we've had a number of generic imatinibs that become available, and the prices come down phenomenally, making it available to everyone. So this has also been a success, and it's quite sort of important to see what has actually happened with the pricing of imatinib. When it was registered first in this country in South African rands at a rate of about 15 rand to the US dollar, it was 30,000 rands a month. And now the price paid by the government for this is about 600 rands a month for the generic. So it shows how prices can become affordable for very important medicines, provided that there is enough generics with enough competition and enough insight on the part of healthcare authorities and regulatory authorities and pharmaceutical companies. And the other big group that's we have access to, and this has been a tremendous battle, in immunomodulatory agents, thalidomide and lenalidomide, which, as everyone knows, have played a major role in changing our access to treatment in multiple myeloma. We all know that thalidomide was first developed in West Germany in the early 50s as a sedative. It was unfortunately found to be useful to prevent morning sickness in pregnant women, and was drawn in 1962 due to severe teratogenic effects that everyone knows. It also has a lot of other major toxicities, including peripheral neuropathy, sedation, constipation, which makes it a difficult agent to use. Unfortunately, this agent was cornered after it came back on the market in multiple myeloma by a single pharmaceutical company, which made access very difficult. And it took us many years to be able to have access to thalidomide for multiple myeloma patients, for state patients. Only became available in 2017. It took us 10 years of negotiation to be able to get access to thalidomide for patients with multiple myeloma. But we do have access to it, and as we know, it is very active in multiple myeloma based on studies done in the 1990s, mainly from Bart Barloghi in Arkansas and others, also type 2 minus refractory anemia. But one of the developments has been the availability of the newer IMiDs such as lenalidomide and pomalidomide. Now, lenalidomide is I think, a very important lesson of what can go right and what can go wrong, because up until very recently, it was totally unavailable to patients in state hospitals and to almost all private insured patients because of its price, because it was patented and unavailable in generic form. And recently, we have had access to a number of generics, and the price has gone down, and this is only for private patients, but hopefully this coming year we'll get access to lenalidomide for public patients from 60,000 South African rands a month to now 10, and in fact, looking at what the state price will be, it will probably be about 4. So, you know, this is a big improvement because this agent has really become the mainstay of treatment. It's far better tolerated than thalidomide and is more effective, and has really become the mainstay of treatment of multiple myeloma, together with bortezomib and dexamethasone and the RVD regimen used throughout the world. And so we hope that soon our patients will have access to lenalidomide as well as thalidomide in myeloma, which I think is going to be useful because we struggle with thalidomide, especially with the peripheral neuropathy issue. And I think this is something very important. And hopefully we will be able to have access to that. But this has also been a tremendous battle to get access to agents like this for even a limited number of patients, because the high cost precluded not only state patients, but the majority of insured patients because the prices were so high. And then the other big game changer in multiple myeloma have been the proteasome inhibitors. We know that the ubiquitin proteasome pathway is essential in the degradation of intracellular proteins, colloquially known as a cellular garbage can. The 26S proteasome activates NF-kappa B by degrading its inhibitory protein I-kappa B. And if you block NF-kappa B proteasome inhibition, you'll promote apoptosis and inhibit cell adhesion and angiogenesis. Bortezomib became available worldwide in the early 2000s. It's only recently become available in the state sector in South Africa, in fact, a few months back. But it has become a mainstay in the treatment of multiple myeloma. The prices have also come down quite drastically because of the advent of generics. And also the other thing I think that's changed that made it a lot better is that it can be given subcutaneously rather than intravenously, which makes the administration a lot easier. Can theoretically even be done at home. And so it's become a much more available medicine in myeloma. So myeloma treatment has become a lot more viable in our environment, whereas up until recently it was really horrendous, our management of this disease. Autologous stem cell transplantation has always been available going back many years, but we weren't able to get deep remission. So in spite of being able to do transplants, our induction therapy was rather limited, but we improved dramatically in that way. The newer proteasome inhibitors, carfilzomib and ixazomib, are available. They have been registered by a regulatory authority, but they remain very costly, and I'm not quite sure where they're going to fit into most patients' care. And then the last big new therapies in heme and other malignancies, and the big hype in oncology in the last 5 years or so, the immune checkpoint inhibitors, the CTLA-4 inhibitors, ipilimumab and trelimumab, that block the interaction of B7 on dendritic cells with CTLA-4 on T cells that inhibit T cell function, and then the anti-PD-1 and anti-PD-L1 monoclonals, nivolumab, pembrolizumab, atezolizumab, avelumab, and durvalumab, that block the interaction of PD-1 on the T cell and PD-L1 and PD-L2 on the tumor cell. And this has been a big breakthrough in the treatment of cancer in general, but the availability of these agents is very, very difficult. If you look at this cartoon here, we look at the number of immune checkpoint inhibitors that have been approved for all sorts of cancers. I've just highlighted the two important lymphoid malignancies, classical Hodgkin lymphoma and primary mediastinal B-cell lymphoma. And, you know, unfortunately, our availability of these agents in this country is extremely difficult unless we're doing a clinical trial. We do have a clinical trial there with pembrolizumab in Hodgkin's in adolescents and young adults. But in general, it's been difficult to get access to, except for people with very good insurance, with the price of 80,000 South African rands every 3 weeks, coming to about 1.3 million rands a year for 2 years, nearly 3 million rands, which almost all insurers won't pay. And so it's very difficult to access. Our experience of use of immune checkpoint inhibitors, and the only one that is registered in this country is pembrolizumab. The others are coming. Tislelizumab should be available soon. But the bottom line is that all the immune checkpoint inhibitors, for whatever cancer you're using them, and obviously they're used in many different cancers, including hematological malignancies, but the availability of these agents is a big problem. Just interesting, the one disease where Pembro didn't work out well was in multiple myeloma, when the combination of lenalidomide and pembrolizumab, actually the trial was stopped early because of excess toxicity and futility. But that's one of the few failures with immune checkpoint inhibitors. And it's also sobering that things don't always work everywhere, as we know. The problem with, as I said, this agent still remains, or these agents are still on patent. I'm not sure how availability of this will change in the next few years. We get all sorts of promises from the various companies, but nothing ever comes to fruition. And so it remains a very difficult problem that almost probably in reality, maybe 1 to 2% of the population who have the appropriate cancers would have access to this medicine in this country. And that has, obviously, with all the improvements, has been very worrisome. And hopefully, there'll be found ways to change it. Probably the one good thing is that there are so many PD-1 and PD-L1 inhibitors out there from different companies that hopefully with some competition, the prices will go down. But at the moment,
Dr. Rav,
I'm almost finished. This is my second last slide. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm just actually going to finish just looking at the essential medicine list. And this is the EML from the WHO from 2015. And the important agents to see on this are rituximab that I mentioned, imatinib from a hematological malignancy point of view, and bendamustine. And at that stage, dasatinib and nilotinib were left out. In 2017, those were added on. In 2019, the myeloma medicines and pegosparaginase were added. And then recently, ibrutinib. Now, in South Africa, we have an essential medicine list committee doing tertiary medicines that does oncology medicines, that follows the guidelines from the WHO, but also looks at our own environment. And in spite of what the WHO has said, we still remain with access to a very limited number of medicines of these new medicines in hematological malignancies.
Yeah.
And so what can we do to fix this? We need to improve the harmonization between pharmaceutical companies, academia, regulatory authorities, and WHO, and also between regulatory authorities. We need to do something about evergreening, the extending of patents of these medicines. There needs to be better collaboration, development of generics and biosimilars. We need to also prevent the abandonment of old medicines that is having a very negative impact on care in developing countries. Emails are very useful, but they need to be done in collaboration throughout the world, because ultimately, unless we find lasting solutions, modern cancer care will only be available to the very wealthy and high-income countries. And unfortunately, we're seeing the development of more and more exciting new cancer treatments for less and less people throughout the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rav, for that very excellent presentation. Well, we're still not able to get in touch with Dr. Stefan. I believe she might be in an area of South Africa where there is power failure, I understand. So we've gone a little bit over time, but it's okay since Dr. Stefan is not available. I think at this time I would probably just proceed. And I see that Dr. Durosimi of Nigeria is around. Durosimi, if we're around, please let me know. Are you with us, Dr. Durosimi?
Yes, yes.
Good. Okay, now let me just introduce you very, very briefly. I have known Dr. Durosimi for a long time. He's the professor of hematology at the Obafemi Awolowo University in Ile-Ife, Nigeria. He is a fellow of the Nigerian College of Pathologists and a fellow of the West African College of Physicians, among his many titles. He spent several years now as the principal investigator developing an innovative treatment regimen for acute lymphoblastic leukemia for young Nigerians. He's been doing this for quite a while now. We're still having some problem getting money for that research program. So, Professor Durosimi, you're welcome. Please take it over from now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Durosimi, I can see only your filler right now. Can you just move your screen a little bit so that we can see your full? That's good. A little bit further. The other way. Yeah. Things are getting better. Up a little bit. Okay. Now you can share your screen now whenever you're ready.
Okay. Yeah. Can you see my screen?
No, not now. I'm seeing your face, but not your. You're going to make a PowerPoint presentation, I presume, right?
Yes.
Okay, we're not seeing your PowerPoints right now.
Okay, you should see it now.
Now we're seeing your screen. I mean, yep, you're just starting to share your screen now. Go ahead.
Okay. I'm talking on the challenges of managing hematological malignancies in African institutions.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry, what is happening? Well, hematological malignancies are well known to all of us, as listed here, the lymphomas, myeloma, and the leukemias. Cancer management in most of our parts of the country or the world is not free. And it is often associated with heavy morbidity and mortality due to late presentation. The major problems we encounter are lack of and high cost of chemotherapy, incomplete and lack of therapy, lack of treatment personnel, hemato-oncologists, nurses, pharmacists, and others. Designated cancer centers are infrequent, and there is deficiency of radiotherapy and hematopoietic stem cell transplantation facilities. More importantly, the available social health insurance scheme is not very effective. It appears it is designed for the rich with little relief to the poor.
Dr. Drosselin, we're not seeing your screen very well. The half of the slide is not visible. Is there any way you can adjust that, please? I think you need to go to the screen. Yeah, slideshow. That might make things a bit better. If you go to the slide, yeah, the slides are not, yep, now that's better. That is it. Thank you.
Okay.
Yep. Yep, we can now see the slides well.
Okay, thank you. Generally, patients are best managed in medical oncology centers to facilitate multidisciplinary treatment team with standing hematologists and hemato-oncologists, laboratory physicians and molecular biologists, oncology nurses, oncology pharmacists, physical therapists, as the need arises, radiation oncologists, pediatrics, hemato-oncologists, physicians and surgeons, palliative care specialists. Others are stem cell transplant specialists, psychiatrists, and psychologists. So let's go through briefly the Global Count 2012 and review the burden of leukemia in our parts of the world. Wolf is standardized ratio among males, females, the mortality of 100,000. Globally, among male 5.6 per 100,000, among females 3.9, mortality 4.2, that is 75% versus 71.2%. More developed countries, much higher, 8.8 versus 5.8. Mortality, 52.3 versus 48.3. Less developed parts of the world, 4.3 versus 3.2. Mortality very high, 86% versus 31% in females. Africa still much lower, 3.3 per 100,000 versus 2.6 in females. Mortality 94%, 96.2%. So if you go region by region, East Africa, 3.8 versus 3.4, 97.4, 86.8. Mid Africa, 2.6.1.8, 96.2 versus 94.4%. North Africa, 5.6, 3.9. Mortality is still high, 87.5 versus 87.2. South Africa, 3.6 versus 3.6. Mortality 94.4 versus 88.5. And West Africa, where I am, 1.4 versus 1.2. Mortality 92.9 versus 91.7. In effect, leukemia is much less in Africa, but mortality is heavy. Leukemia accounted for 352,000 or 25% of the 14 million new cases of cancers and 265,000 of the 8.2 million cancer deaths in 2012, respectively. The incidence was higher in the more developed countries at 8.8 for males and 5.8 for females, compared to 3.3 and 2.6 per 100,000 for males and females in Africa, respectively. the very high mortality incidence ratio of 0.94. Sorry, please.
Okay.
The very high mortality incidence ratio of 0.94 for Africa and less developed population compared to 0.48 or 0.52 in the developed population confirm the poorer prognosis of leukemia in our parts of the world. This could be due to the lower incidence of common ALL among the under 5 children in low-income countries of Africa and Asia, compared to the children in the Western Caucasian population, where under 5 common ALL peaks. Lifestyle-related environmental deprivation, chronic infections, poor nutrition, and immunological challenges are equally important. And unreported cases of leukemia deaths in Africa could also be a factor. Deficiency of funding. Health funding is also very, very important. Failure of most of the African Union member states to implement the Abuja Declaration of 2001 that mandated the countries to set aside 15% of their annual revenue for healthcare as part of the Millennium Development Goals is a major problem. And the very obvious health inequities. If you look at the situation compare the situation in North America, that is Canada and USA, that have combined 14% of the world population, 10% of the global disease burden, over 37% of the world health workers, and about 50% of global health resources. With sub-Saharan Africa's 11% of global population, about 24% of global disease burden, but only 3% of health workers and less than 1% of the world financial resources will further explain the gross deficiencies in our management, in the outcome of the management of leukemia in our parts of the world. Let us look at hematological cancer management and regional economic status. Look at South Africa, North Africa, with example from Egypt, West Africa, Nigeria, Senegal, and East Africa using Uganda. South Africa is an upper middle income country. The annual income in 4,906 to 12,695 per annum. Egypt, low middle economy, 1045 to $4,395. West Nigeria, that is West Africa, another low middle income country. Senegal, also low middle income country. Uganda, low economic country. Dedicated cancer centers. We have this only in South Africa and North Africa, but none in West Africa. That is none in Nigeria and Senegal, indeed most of West Africa. But we have one in Uganda. Transplant centers. There are in South Africa, North Africa. We have one in West Africa. This is located in Nigeria, Benin. It's a new center, but none in Senegal and other parts of and in East Africa. Health insurance, which is a major source of major evidence of universal health care, is a problem, is another major problem. South Africa, as of 2016, 14 all forms of health insurance, 14.9%. This was as 2016. Egypt has 55% coverage. Nigeria, as at 2018, only 2.3% of the over 200 million population. But as at now, little difference, just about 5%. Senegal, 6.9%. Uganda, 1.5%. Universal health coverage. Well, there are reports of the existence in both Egypt and South Africa, but none in other parts. How do we manage? What are the challenges based on this inadequate funding? When we look at the diagnosis and staging of hematological malignancies, there are no problems with morphologic confirmation, including bone marrow aspiration and biopsy. Physical examination is not a problem. French-American British classification is part of the diagnostic workup. But cytochemistry, although simple Sudan Black B, MPO, anesthesis in AM, MPS, and ALL, are available subject to affordability. Where you have good insurance, it can easily be done. Otherwise, it is not available to everybody. Diagnosis, immunophenotyping are also available because we now have quite a number of multinational molecular laboratories where immunophenotyping and other cytogenetics and pure molecular diagnostics are available. But this is again subject to availability of funds. In Uganda, Nigeria, and Senegal, but if these are available in research centers, or sometimes we have to send materials outside the shores. When we look at the availability of frontline induction therapeutic agents, they are available, but subject to funding. If you do not have insurance, it's out of pocket expense, which makes life very, very difficult for poorly paid people. Indeed, for a lot of our patients, because to treat ordinary acute lymphoblastic leukemia is over $500,000, which is not affordable by many of us here. For consolidation, we use FIDAC. Maintenance of all these treatment modalities are subject to availability of funds. But a major problem is non-availability of clinical trials. This is where we are really not doing very well, because what we are using is just second-hand information. But in South Africa and Egypt, we have quite a number of clinical trials ongoing. Well, refractory diseases and the use of salvage chemotherapy. Again, these are subject to availability of chemotherapy and fund. Because there are times you have the money, but to source for the drugs is another major problem. Why it becomes necessary in patients with relapsed refractory leukemias, where you need allo stem cell transplantation. Transplantation is readily available in South Africa and Egypt. But in other parts of Africa, you have to send to these countries or other parts of the world. Novel targeted medications are difficult to come by. Chronic lymphocytic leukemia, routine clinical evaluation is not a problem. Clinical evaluation is not a problem. Diagnosis is also not a problem. Immunophenotyping, just as for acute leukemia, is subject to availability of funds. Cytogenetics, molecular cytogenetics, PCR diagnostics for stratification are available only in research centers. Chemo remains, for treatment of CLL, chemotherapy remains frontline therapy. Watchful waiting in a symptomatic patient is still practiced. Chlorambucil plus or minus corticosteroids is a standard practice. Fludarabine, cytoxan, that is cyclophosphamide, for those who can afford the fludarabine, is standard therapy. And those who have the resources to part with extra funds, rituximab. We use fludarabine, cytoxan, and rituximab. We have a few patients on this drug. The novel chemotherapy for CLL are difficult to come by, at least in other African countries outside South Africa and Egypt. Chronic myeloid leukemia, courtesy of Novartis initiated Max Solutions that has been donating tyrosine kinase inhibitors to developing countries since 2003. Most of our patients are on this drug, but the limitation is cytogenetics, which is not available in many countries. Quantitative reverse transcriptase is available in Nigeria, for example. We have to domesticate it because we started using Gene Expert. We got it replaced with a donation of standard PCR machine by a friend. So we are now using standard PCR machine for quantification of ABL for diagnosis and routine monitoring. Of course, hydroxycarbamide and allopurinol are still available. Practical cancer control initiative in Nigeria. Recently, in realization of the growing cost of chemotherapy and inability of many patients to afford the cost, the Federal Ministry of Health initiated what we call Cancer Access Partnership CAP program. This is in collaboration with top pharmaceutical companies for supply of about 27 cancer drugs, including biologicals, at greatly reduced price from about down by 50 to 60%. So these drugs are now available in quite a number of our specialist hospitals. Provision of Cancer Health Fund is another initiative where the government is providing funds for indigent Nigerians diagnosed of any of the following major cancers: breast, cervix, and prostate. Anybody with this is assessed and put on free therapy. It's a new initiative, and we believe many philanthropists will buy into this to assist Ministry of Health, but the program has started. In conclusion, challenges of leukemia management in Africa is daunting, and concerted efforts are needed for amelioration. Current situation, only 6 of the 54 countries have stem cell transplantation centers: Algeria, Egypt, Morocco, Nigeria, South Africa, and Tunisia. There is inadequate national cancer registries. Over 50% of the countries have no radiotherapy facilities, and less than 10 countries have internationally recognized dedicated oncology centers. Recommendations. African countries must implement the African Union Member States Abuja Declaration of 2001 that 15% of the annual revenue should be set aside for healthcare. The WHO essential generic cytotoxic drugs and biosimilar drugs should be encouraged to save costs on medications. Member states should faithfully implement the social health insurance scheme meant to achieve universal health care in favor of the poor and reduce out-of-pocket expense on healthcare. Funding should be made available for training of personnel and establishment of dedicated oncology centers across the continent. Participation in international and national clinical trials should be encouraged. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Drosimi, for that very excellent presentation. We are running out of time. Now, Dr. Newman, would you like to make your presentation now? Is that possible, Dr. Newman?
Sure, that would be wonderful. Thank you very much, Dr.
Yeah,
Roberts.
but just you say you have somewhere, you're going somewhere else. So please, if you don't mind, why not just take it over from here? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's actually just a different session for the aortic meeting that I'll be moving over to.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your help.
Right, so I think we need to discontinue the screen share for Dr. Doroshimi's screen.
Dr.
Okay.
Just, yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you. I'm still being blocked.
Okay.
Lisa, if you don't mind, I just introducing you very quickly.
Sure.
Dr. Lisa Newman is a professor of surgery and chief of division of breast surgery at the Weill Cornell Medicine and New York Presbyterian Hospital Network of New York is changing very rapidly these days with commission. She's also the medical director and founder of the International Center for the Study of Breast Cancer Subtypes. She's a second vice president of the American College of Surgeons. She's a very prominent member of ASCO, the American Society of Clinical Oncology. Dr. Nima is an African-American who has extensive research commitments in parts of West Africa. She is also has some very interesting views about breast cancer subtypes in the African diaspora. So I'm very much looking forward to your presentation, Dr. Newman. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Williams. It's such a pleasure to join all of you today and a true honor to speak with you regarding a field of interdisciplinary research that we call oncologic anthropology. And hopefully you guys will agree with me as the presentation proceeds that oncologic anthropology really is a very appropriate framework for discussing how our ancestral germline genetics and ancestral population migration patterns has led to genetic variants that impact on our cancer risk today. Now, here in the United States, we start a lot of these discussions regarding genetics of ancestry and how they might impact on disparities because of the glaring disparities that we see in breast cancer burden. Population-based mortality rates from breast cancer are 40% higher in African American compared to white American women. And a lot of this difference in outcomes is related to socioeconomics because of poverty rates, lack of insurance, a whole host of socioeconomic disadvantages that are more prevalent in the African American community result in delays in a breast cancer diagnosis, a more advanced stage distribution, and inadequate treatment, unfortunately, in many cases. And so all of these factors definitely contribute to the higher mortality rates. Because of the very close correlation between racial ethnic identity and cancer outcomes, many people ask the very legitimate question of whether racial ethnic identity has any genetic or biologic relevance at all, or is it merely a socio-political construct? Now, the answer, of course, is that racial ethnic identity has both components. And it is a socio-political construct because how we self-identify and also how society labels us influences where we live, the communities that we live in, and the characteristics of those communities, including environmental factors that will impact on cancer risk. How we self-identify and how we are labeled also influences our educational, professional opportunities, and this will have a downstream effect on our access to healthcare. However, our racial ethnic identity is also associated with ancestral genetic factors that can also contribute to cancer burden. So the two different components of racial ethnic identity are not mutually exclusive, and they can both contribute to cancer burden. This becomes very clear if we simply look at the other features of the breast cancer burden in African American women. And these characteristics that are in boldface on this slide are characteristics that we cannot easily ascribe to socioeconomics. For example, the younger age distribution, with up to 40% of African American women being younger than 50 when first diagnosed with breast cancer, compared to only 1/5 of white breast cancer patients being diagnosed in this premenopausal age category. As we will be discussing in this presentation, African American women have a twofold higher rate of biologically aggressive tumors, such as triple-negative breast cancers, and we have a higher population-based incidence of another biologically aggressive tumor phenotype, primary inflammatory breast cancers. Lastly, the population-based incidence of male breast cancer is also higher in the African American compared to white American communities. And so very clearly, we need to be investigating tumor biology and genetics as we try to comprehensively understand the explanations for breast cancer disparities. It became very clear that tumor biology plays a role in breast cancer outcome disparities when we simply look at population-based incidence rates and population-based mortality rates from breast cancer in Black women compared to white women over the past several decades. And this is what I'm showing you with the curves to the left of this slide, where we see that over the past several decades, typically incidence of breast cancer was higher for white women compared to Black women. But whenever those incidence rates changed over time, they changed in parallel, suggesting the comparable influence of environmental and lifestyle factors on the two different population subsets. We see a different pattern, however, when we look at population-based mortality rates shown by the curves at the bottom of this graphic. And up until the early 1980s, death rates from breast cancer were equal for Black women and white women. And after that point, the mortality curves separated primarily because of declining death rates in white women, but largely unchanging mortality rates in Black women. And this is probably because we started to unmask differences in tumor biology, because tamoxifen emerges in the very late 1970s as a very powerful targeted endocrine treatment for breast cancer. But tamoxifen is, of course, only effective at improving survival rates for women with estrogen receptor positive breast cancer. As shown by the bar graphics on the right of this slide, African American breast cancer patients are much more likely to have ER negative tumors. And so we simply did not benefit from the very powerful emergence of targeted endocrine therapies for breast cancer. We've clearly gone way beyond simply dichotomizing breast cancer as being ER positive versus ER negative, and we now characterize breast cancer as an entire spectrum of different intrinsic subtypes that have distinct prognoses and tumor biologies, and the intrinsic basal subtype is the most virulent. Triple negative breast cancers, the tumors that are negative for estrogen receptor, progesterone receptor, and HER2/neu, for the most part correlate very closely with identifying a woman that has the aggressive basal intrinsic subtype. And we can indeed perform ER/PR and HER2/neu immunohistochemistry on each of our breast cancer patients in the clinic so that we can identify the triple negative breast cancer patients who are, again, the ones most likely to have the basal intrinsic subtype. It's been well demonstrated here in the United States that African ancestry patients have higher population-based incidence rates of triple negative breast cancers compared to women of all different racial ethnic subsets in the United States. And we see this higher incidence of triple negative breast cancers in Black women at all different age categories, as shown by these incidence graphics. The link between ER negative and triple negative breast cancer among patients with African ancestry is not something that's unique to the United States. And in studies from Great Britain, from Switzerland, and from Brazil, investigators have all demonstrated that their African ancestry breast cancer patients are more likely to have ER negative and triple negative breast cancers compared to their non-African ancestry breast cancer patients. So this is what motivated my group and other international research groups to study the breast cancer burden of women residing on the continent of Africa so that we could try to get a better handle on the genetics, the germline genetics of African ancestry and how these germline genetics might impact on breast cancer risk. These types of studies are very exciting in gaining insights regarding breast cancer disparities here in the United States and elsewhere, but it's also a very novel way of trying to learn about the pathogenesis of triple negative breast cancers overall. So cutting to the chase, these bar graphs summarize what we've seen in our studies of breast cancer among Ghanaian women, which is of course a country located in Western Sub-Saharan Africa, compared to the breast cancers that we've seen in Ethiopian patients. And Ethiopia, of course, is located on the east coast of Africa. We've seen very high frequencies of triple negative breast cancer in Ghanaian women, with about half of those breast cancer patients being triple negative, compared to very low rates of frequencies of triple negative breast cancers at only 15% among the Ethiopian breast cancer patients that we've evaluated. The frequency of triple negative breast cancer in African American women is intermediate between the rates that we see in Ghanaian women and the frequencies that we see in white American women. So we believe that the population migration patterns of Western Sub-Saharan ancestral populations accounts for these different patterns. The transatlantic slave trade, which forced migration of the ancestors of contemporary Western Sub-Saharan Africans, including contemporary Ghanaians, brought those ancestors across the Atlantic Ocean to serve as slaves in the American colonies. And so as contemporary African Americans, we have quite a bit of shared ancestry with contemporary Ghanaians. Much of the slave trade involving the ancestors of contemporary East Africans was brought further eastward over to the Mideast and to Asia. And so African Americans tend to have less shared ancestry with contemporary East Africans, including contemporary Ethiopians. And so along the concept of oncologic anthropology, we believe that the germline genetics associating African ancestry with heritable risk of triple negative breast cancer is specifically related to the germline genetics of Western Sub-Saharan African ancestry. And so we were extremely excited about 4.5 years ago when we were able to recruit this absolutely brilliant geneticist, Dr. Melissa Davis, to serve as the scientific director for our international research team, the International Center for the Study of Breast Cancer Subtypes. And at this aortic conference, you'll be hearing from Melissa talking about her research in much greater detail. But Melissa was a wonderful addition to our team because for most of her career, she's been a world leader in studying a particular gene, the Duffy gene. And the Duffy gene is very exciting in studying cancer disparities because there is a particular variant of the Duffy gene known as Duffy null, which is specifically linked to Western Sub-Saharan African ancestry. And so we were very excited to have Melissa apply her research looking at Duffy null to our international database. Melissa is not the only one who has identified Duffy null as being an interesting variant that might account for cancer disparities. The data from this slide comes from a study of the AMBER Consortium, where the investigators demonstrated that the African American women compared to white American women tend to have different levels of circulating chemokines that might be associated with cancer risk. And when the AMBER Consortium went on to do genotyping, they found that the presence of the Duffy null variant was causally linked to these differences in circulating chemokines. Now, unfortunately, most of the genome-wide association studies that have been published include very little data from African ancestry individuals, as demonstrated by these two pie diagrams. Since the Duffy null variant is so closely linked to Western Sub-Saharan African ancestry and is generally not seen among individuals with European ancestry, the Duffy null variant ends up being overlooked in most of the published genome-wide association studies. So Melissa evaluated the Duffy null variant using our large international biorepository data. And she evaluated Duffy null as well as a whole series of other genetic variants that have been linked in the literature to the development of breast cancer. Thanks to the genius biostatistical analyses of our colleague, Dr. Yale Chen from the Henry Ford Health System, we found this very intriguing table shown here where the Duffy null variant was the strongest predictor of having a triple negative breast cancer compared to having a non-triple negative breast cancer. And this concept of the Duffy null variant and oncologic anthropology fits together. Many of the variants that are associated with ancestry, as shown by this slide from the brilliant anthropologist, Dr. Sarah Tishkoff, these are not variants that pop up randomly. Many of these ancestry informative marker variants are variants that were acquired over the past many thousands of years as a consequence of evolutionary selection pressure on the human genome, allowing the human genome to survive various environmental threats over the various millennia, environmental threats related to geography, climate, different infectious diseases. And the Duffy null variant is one other example of such a variant. The Duffy null variant was acquired among the ancestors of Western Sub-Saharan Africa because it confers some resistance to malaria. And so over the course of the Bantu expansion, where Western Sub-Saharan Africans migrated across the continent of Africa, they brought the Duffy null variant with them, and you see the Duffy null variant expressed to varying degrees in admixed populations of East Africa and South Africa. And this seems to correlate with the frequency of triple negative breast cancer in different regions of Africa. The Duffy null variant also came across the ocean with the transatlantic slave trade. And so approximately 3/4 of African Americans carry the Duffy null variant, but not 100% because we have a lot of genetic admixture with Europeans. And we believe that the Duffy null variant contributes to the high triple negative breast cancer burden of African Americans. The reason why the Duffy null variant confers some resistance to malaria is because if you carry the Duffy null variant, you lack the Duffy protein on your red blood cell, and the Duffy protein on the red blood cell is basically the entryway for the malaria parasite to get into the red blood cell and cause the malaria disease. But now we are also learning through wonderful work done by Melissa that if you lack that Duffy protein on your red blood cell, it also causes you to lose some of the buffering capacity that the red blood cell normally provides with regard to different circulating levels of various cancer-associated chemokines. And so this probably accounts for the findings of the AMBER consortium that I showed you previously. Ongoing work in Melissa's lab is seeking to connect the dots between the Duffy variant, the Duffy protein on the red blood cell, and the immune landscape of the mammary tissue, leading to the risk of developing triple negative breast cancer. And so this work is very exciting, again, to try to lead us to explanations for the root causes of triple negative breast cancer. Other investigators studying germline genetic ancestry are learning intriguing things with regard to the breast cancer burden of Hispanic Latinx women who have genetic admixture between Europeans, indigenous American populations, and Africans. And Laura Faherman has demonstrated that in these admixed Latinx women, extent of indigenous American ancestry correlates with lower risk of breast cancer, whereas extent of European ancestry in these women accounts for a higher risk of breast cancer. Oncologic anthropology concepts can be applied to other diseases. And when we look at kidney disease, which is also more prevalent among African Americans, some brilliant investigators have learned that there are 2 African ancestry associated genetic variants in the APOL1 gene that are causally linked to this higher risk of hypertension attributed end-stage renal disease and glomerulosclerosis in African Americans. And these African ancestry associated APOL1 variants are variants that developed in Africa because they confer some increased resistance to the Trypanosoma brucei parasite, which causes the African sleeping sickness, a very deadly progressive neurologic disorder. But today we see that variant expressed in contemporary African American populations, and it is related to hypertension, morbidity, and mortality with renal disease. It's also possible that concepts of oncologic anthropology might teach us about the reasons why BRCA1 and BRCA2 genetic mutations have founder mutations associated with different populations. Some investigators have postulated that the BRCA mutations did arise out of evolutionary selection pressure favoring increased fertility in past generations. That favoring of the BRCA mutation, however, becomes tempered in contemporary populations where the women live longer and the BRCA mutations are associated with higher mortality risk because of breast and ovarian cancer. I am very excited about investigators studying multiple myeloma disparities because it's entirely possible that multiple myeloma as an immunoglobulin and immune system disorder may have its roots in terms of higher frequency in African Americans in some of the other hereditary links to African heritage. And so I will stop there, but I do thank all of you for your time and attention.
Thank you very much for this very brilliant presentation, Dr. Newman. I have learned a lot, and now I don't know whether you are going to be away, so you wouldn't be around for the question and answer session. Are you open now for questions? Can we?
Absolutely.
I think
Absolutely.
that is something that we should prepare because. Is there anybody out there with any questions for Dr. Newman? Let me see. I don't see anything in the chat section here. Well, I'm fascinated about this dophenol thing. We know that dophenol phenotype is low in certain populations in sub-Saharan Africa. And I see it almost in the same light as the sickle cell situation. It seems to me, I think this dophenol thing is very fascinating, and there may be other similar genomic signatures around that need to be found. Now, I know more African diaspora people who died of multiple myeloma than any other cancers. Unfortunately, the most recent one is Colin Powell, unfortunately. And I just feel that there is something going on with, we know that dophenol has immunogenetic protection. It's a very interesting stuff. So I'm looking for more information, especially from Dr. Davis, as you already alluded to, and maybe you can give us more information that you may have as to the role of the possible role of dophenol in multiple myeloma situation.
Yeah, so I totally agree with you, Dr. Williams. Dophenol is a very exciting genetic variant to evaluate when it comes to the immune landscape of Western Sub-Saharan African ancestry individuals. But you're right, there may well be others. And we have the technology, the time, the moment is here for us to be using the technology regarding, quantifying germline genetics of our ancestry and looking at how some of these germline genetics have downstream effects on that immune landscape. I believe that this is what will get us to the root causes of cancer, which is, of course, a genetic disease at its root causes. So it is a very, very exciting area of research. Brilliant researchers like Melissa hold the key to getting the answers to these very exciting questions. And on a clinical basis, it's been so rewarding to me to see some of this research coming to life through the laboratory, such as in Melissa's laboratory, because we've wondered for so long, why are these patterns why do we see these patterns among the patients that we're taking care of? And clinically, we started connecting the dots between what we were observing in our international populations and the work that Melissa is doing just by our travels, because we learned that, when we went to Ghana, we had to take malaria prophylaxis, but when we traveled to Ethiopia, we didn't have to take malaria prophylaxis. And we're seeing these differences in triple negative breast cancer on the two different parts of the continent. And so that led us to think, some of these variants associated with malaria resistance might lead to some of the answers. And Melissa, sure enough, was able to connect some of those dots. So it really is very, very exciting work. And I do look forward to the work of Melissa in making those links even more robust in her laboratory and looking at other genetic variants.
Fantastic.
Chris, can I make a comment, please?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah. The one area of Africa that you left out was Southern Africa, where and if you look at migration patterns, you showed that, probably everything started in East Africa, and there was migration to West and to out of Africa and also to Southern Africa. Now we know that in Southern Africa, breast cancer, we do not see an increased incidence of triple negative breast cancer. The incidence is very similar to that in the rest of the world and very different to West Africa. But multiple myeloma is a different situation, where we are seeing more multiple myeloma in African people in Southern Africa, and especially at a younger age. And so I think it's probably a lot more complicated than we think it is. And I think you may be dealing with a combination of environmental and genetic factors, where you're having increased antigenic drive and crowding, because there is a relationship with tuberculosis. The malaria issue may not be relevant, because if you look at malaria and going on to at least the Zambezi River, there's a lot of malaria. You're not seeing the same patterns as you're seeing in West Africa. So although I think that, the issues that result in these different disease patterns, I think are very, very complicated. And the migration patterns that we've seen in Africa and the world are very complex and need a lot of elucidation. Also, we've seen movement from, say, Europe back into Africa that's changed. By North Africa, you're getting a different pattern. So I think this whole issue of population genetics and cancer is an extremely fascinating area, but it needs a lot of careful dissection. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree.
I agree. It absolutely does require careful dissection, but the technology is here to do that work and to sort these different variants out. And if we continue studying those genetics with very homogeneous populations that have only European ancestry, then we lose the opportunity to even try to understand these issues. So I do believe that we need to be broadly applying the tools of phenotyping and genetics to better understand the root causes of cancer.
Yeah, the other point I would like to make is that we tend to limit the sickle cell gene to Black Africa, to Sub-Saharan Africa, but that is probably not quite correct. There is a sickle cell gene problem in Italy, in Greece, in Turkey, and even in some parts of Mongolia. These were areas where falciparum malaria was once a problem ancestrally. And so we can, this work can even be expanded further, but I'm just fascinated about the whole thing. So Dr. Nima, thank you very much. I think we have to move on now, and Dr. The next presentation, probably the last for today, would be Dr. Nazik Hamid presentation. Nazik, are you around?
Hello.
Okay, Nazik. So Dr. Nazik Hamid is an associate professor at the Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario, Canada, not too far from me here. She's deeply committed to the training of oncologists in her native country of Sudan, as well as other countries in East Africa, especially Kenya. She told me that she recently just returned from a trip to Sudan. I think she spends almost 50% of her time in Sudan and also in Canada. Anyway, she is the immediate past vice president of the North American region of AORTIC, and she's the current chairperson of the education committee of AORTIC. So Dr. Hamid does a lot of teaching of AORTIC people. And so I'm looking forward to her presentation, which is going to be on the training of African physicians in the management of hematological malignancies. So Dr. Hamid, please take it over.
Thank you so much, Chris. It's indeed a pleasure to be here. And obviously from the previous presentation, it seems we need people to do the work. And so that's why my fascination with education, where it comes from. So when it comes to training, I guess as a co-chair for the Education and Training Committee, it's a chance for me to discuss with you the AORTIC Education and Committee Action Plan components, which we actually worked on, and hopefully we will be taken over in the next few years into action. And we developed it to 4 domains: professional development, postgraduate training, and health professional education, the harmonization, and e-learning. And for development of programs, that's what you need. You need to make sure that the faculty that is going to teach is there. You need to develop the program, and hopefully the AORTIC Resident Learning Group, which is started as a program involving Kenyan residents as well as some other residents from Tanzania, and together in Zoom teaching that actually started before the pandemic in 2018. Hopefully it will continue and it will expand, and maybe we can make use of it in hematology malignancies, as well as mapping the training program, who has what and what can they contribute. And then of course there is the e-learning component, just as the AORTIC channel, and hopefully there will be some further platforms, and you can see this significant interest group, and Hematology Oncology has already made use of it. And this is Chris Williams in our second series, series 2 from the AORTIC channel. So I hope people will make use of that. We also have had some what we call the AORTIC African Cancer Dialogues, where we commented on some of the cutting edge research that's coming from other parts of the world and what it means for us. So I think when it comes to the fact that there is shortage of physicians or health professionals in general, I think we need to change the language that we talk about it. It's really about equitable access to health workers instead of the language of shortage. And so the WHO workforce milestone is that by 2030, all countries are making progress toward halving inequalities in access to our health work, and that's include a physician who is trained in hematologic malignancies. And we know that health professional education sometimes has a bad reputation, that expensive, time consuming, and not entirely attuned to the local disease burden. However, especially in terms of physicians, they're the leaders, the planners, and the policymakers of the health system. And they're an invaluable resource for training of the other health professionals. So we need them in order to advance the health system itself. And when it comes to training in Africa, we have to balance between we need a local context relevance, we need a training that's inclusive, equitable, and culturally appropriate, at the same time excellent and meeting global standards. And so, and this is again from the WHO strategy for 2030, the overall goal of training any physician or health worker is that you want them to be universally available to everyone, accessible so that, you can, even people in remote areas can have access to the physician. They have to be acceptable in terms of their quality and their coverage as well. And so the enabling actions have already been laid out by the Lancet Commission for Health Professionals, and it's usually we need some reforms to transform education. See, some reforms are instructional, leading more competency-driven, education, IT empowered, making sure there is joint, especially for Africa, joint planning, thinking of academic systems, and also using a culture of critical inquiry, both in our research and in the way we train physicians. And we do that by mobilizing leadership. So this is the AORTIC conference is part of that, and enhance investment and strengthen global learning, such as what we learned from Dr. Newman's talk. And when you're trying to build a training program, you have to think of these 4 dimensions, which one is program development, evaluation, and accreditation, so the program itself, and then what you do inside the program, which is the teaching, mentoring, curriculum development, and structural strategy and assessment. And then you need to make sure that the faculty that's teaching is supported and is developed for teaching, and then you need to evaluate the program as well. So if you are building a training program, one of the goals could be locally trained. So local training is the most important thing nowadays, who will provide high quality patient care, research, education, and leadership to control and prevent cancer. And then there has to be social accountability, which means willingness and ability to respond to the need of society, patient, and the health sectors. And also fostering competencies in medical education and medical research. And obviously what we have seen that there's a lot of unknown in the African setting, and that we can start to unpack with research. And so your objective, for example, if you are training for 2 years, these are some example of objective, is that the trainee, by the time they graduate, they can select cost-effective and safe systemic therapy for their patients, conduct interprofessional education session and activities, which is very important because we need the training of the nurses and the other health professionals. So that would be an important competency in Africa, and apply research methodology in areas of cancer detection, prevention, community surveillance, and treatment. And so, and also just harnessing the power of IT. And we know that there is an uptake of new digital technology is faster in low and middle income countries and high income countries, because we went from no landlines to everyone having a cell phone, especially our trainees. So if you want to look at how do we approach this, how do we make it into reality, this is from the WHO transformative scale document. You need to look at the population needs. What do we need? Like if we have more multiple myeloma, we need trainees who know how to treat that. And so you look at, and then the outcomes. So you ask yourself, how many do I need? What quality? And will they be able to function in where they are? So when we look at how many physicians we need, these questions have been looked at in the pediatric oncology world. And so I'm sure a lot of you have looked at the Lancet Oncology Commission and childhood cancers that came out last year. And the commission asked the questions through a Delphi process from the commissioner. What is a reasonably achievable target in low and middle income countries for the number of new diagnosed pediatric cancer patients that can be cared for each year by a physician with specific training in the management of childhood cancer? And the consensus that the reasonable number was 50. So approximately 1 new patient per week. So you need that sort of number. And then, but we don't know how do we translate that in the adult patient world. And when I say even a person who's young, 22, will still be considered an adult. And we know sometimes that pediatric cancer get more resources, and patients who are, when they transfer from the pediatric care to the adult care, the care may actually, quality may go down. And so we need to ask that question. And then we need to ask, and when it comes to the second thing, which is equality, we need to look at the curriculum. Is it the global curriculum? Is it the local curriculum? Continental curriculum? Can we come together? How do we adapt it to our local context? And what kind of competencies that we need? And then, of course, high standards are very important, and assessment is very important. And then there's a next question of career pathways, because if you look at right now what's happening in the continent, what are the models of oncology training in Africa? For physicians, there's clinical oncology, which you train both in giving chemotherapy and radiation. There's medical oncology, which is systemic therapy only. There's hematology only, which could be benign and malignant. And then there's a combination of hematology oncology, which like the new training program in Uganda is like that. And then some people train in benign hematology, and there may be some other hybrids that we actually haven't studied. So I think this is high time to look at what's going on, map it, and find, and then ask this next question: what is the best model for training in hematological malignancies in sub-Saharan Africa? I don't think we have time to debate that, but I think maybe in the next, one of the next activities of this SIG is to start looking at that question and see where in the reality of today, what is the best model for training the people who do that? And one of the things we can consider is that what are the current models of delivery of care? Who treats what and where? Who treats multiple myeloma? Who treats CML? And what is the degree of health inequity? And some of this, Dr. Maisie and Dr. Ruff has mentioned that, but we need to study it further. And then, of course, one of the economic loss and medical tourism that's happening in malignant hematology is probably higher than anything else. Some low middle class families are pushed into financial ruin and financial toxicity, catastrophic spending, because they need to go out of the continent or out of the country to get basic treatments such as autologous transplant or even other treatments that could be more basic. And then, of course, what are the future needs of malignant heme? What are the trends in diseases that will determine who we have? Looking at the same commission, there are several ways of looking at it. We don't have to do it the same way, but I think it's time for us to kind of like have our own commission on adult hematology, hematologic malignancies in Africa. So if you look here, they decided to go, okay, this is referral based. We can start to look at what can we treat at secondary district hospital, and we need just a few personnel. And then so acute ALL in pediatrics, maybe the next is high risk ALL, maybe the next is AML, maybe the next is high risk neuroblastoma and all of that, and infant leukemia and things. And here you go from chemotherapy only, surgery, radiotherapy, etc. That may not be the level that we want, but we need to sit down and start thinking about it in that way if we are treating to increase the capabilities needed and the level of hematology and oncology we need for the adult population. And so going forward, we need to think of creating regional training programs so that countries that have more capacity can train others. The older model of going to train in Europe or North America is becoming less and less viable. And we need to kind of sit and create our needs assessment, strategic plan, and harmonize the curricula. And that starts with program planning, joint planning in this sense. So like a pan-African planning, development, implementation, and evaluation. And hopefully AORTIC will, and this SIG in particular, will lead that in terms of creating maybe a continent-wide strategic plan for hematologic malignancy, align accreditation, addresses the question of equity and how health professional education can help with that and coordinate all the collaboration with AXCO and ASH and support research into education, because we need to make sure that we develop the best channels for education. And so why does it make sense for us to come together? Because there's a lot of similarity in African countries in burden of cancer and population. We can share our resources, including how we assess our trainees. We can share the workload. So this is pragmatic. We can exchange faculty, exchange learner, and have collaborative research, especially in the questions that, because I think a lot of hematologic malignancies are not an area of great disparities within Africa within, the other cancers such as breast and prostate and like that. They don't get the same clout in terms of the resources. And I'm glad to see that the myeloma disparity research is taking off. And so we need to set standards for social accountability at the continental level and address these different discourses in globalized medical education together. And so what is the new reality that's helped us? Our collective strengths. Now we have a critical mass of highly trained and ambitious cancer professionals. And if you have seen our webinar series, there were a lot of young oncologists, hematologists who were able to participate. And then we know that COVID-19 has revealed that the global north does not hold the monopoly on expertise, and we can come together so we can be less dependent on external expertise. And this is my last slide. So yes, I enjoyed teaching in Nairobi and in Sudan. And this is where, you get the passion for change. And this younger generation is hopefully will take the care of hematology malignancy to the next level. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Nazik, for that very brilliant presentation. We are running out of time, but I wonder if there are a few people around with questions for Dr. Hamad. Anybody with any?
Can I make a comment about what Nazika said? Because what she's saying is something that we've been talking about for a long time. I think there needs to be a much more concerted effort to increase collaboration between various African countries. It's very difficult to do that. And I mean, what happens is up to individual people like Nazik or like ourselves, where we've had teaching arrangements from Johannesburg with the University of Nairobi, but it's ad hoc, it's driven by individuals, and there isn't any sort of proper collaborative program because, the politics in Africa doesn't help, the costs in Africa doesn't help. But, I think that we need to try and change this. It's not easy, and also the languages don't help, especially with the Francophone and Anglophone countries. But there needs to be a much more concerted and collaborative approach from various parts of the continent and outside to try and get a more formal process, because I think up until now, if it wasn't for the odd, keen individual like Nazik, this never happens at all. So I think we've got a long way to go. But Nazik, thanks for those comments. I think it's very important what you're saying.
I agree with you entirely, Paul. And now that leads me actually to another question to Nazik. How much access do you have, or how much invitations do you receive of the formal training institutions in Africa? Like, for instance, the College of Physicians and Surgeons of West Africa, have they ever reached out to you with requests that you come and give them a talk? And there are also other bodies like that in Nigeria, College of Pathologists. Anybody ever reached out to you without you, offering yourself, like Paul just said?
Well, I think yes, there are lots of challenges. There are lots of problems, but things are changing. First of all, we have the younger folks who are emerging out of these training programs, like Abinia's program. They are very much more connected than previously, because now it's very easy to connect, and there's a critical mass is happening. So, and then what these people believe is that they're going to change. So, for example, I had a chance to be part of the West African College of Surgeons meeting in Senegal a year ago. There is people like Susan Sitonji in Zambia. They are actually sort of proposing a new college for oncology that will include Sub-Saharan Africa together. Include Southern Africa together with East Africa. So people are now trying to understand the importance of these bodies and also to advocate for oncology within these bodies. So we have to remember that for a long time, oncology was never a specialty by itself. Surgeons were giving chemotherapy. So as an emerging discipline, it has to advocate for itself so that it can get the resources. And also we need to make sure that the population needs are, there's more myeloma, there's more cancer, there's more, so we'll hear that. So our next step is actually this sort of like an African school whereby, because we did that pilot in which we had some sessions, we had 60 residents join from Tanzania, from Kenya, from Sudan, from Ethiopia in one topic, and the case sometimes will be brought by someone from Kenya, someone from someone from Tanzania. And so that thing, and I'm hoping there's a lot of buy-in for that model. And I'm actually going on a sabbatical next year and we'll spend some time working on that. So I hope all of you will work with me and we'll take it from there.
I agree with you entirely. I thought, well, we've had a wonderful meeting, and I thank every one of you who made this great. Thank you very much. I just have the stream 2 people cut off. So I think we've had a very good session. It's now 5 o'clock, and we're not supposed to go further than this. So, Paul, we're going to keep in touch. And Nazik, I think Lisa has left, and Drosim is also away. And we haven't had any interaction with Christina Stephen, unfortunately. Anyway, I thank you very much. I believe it's been a very successful meeting, and I thank you all for your
Thank you for everyone for being here. It was really a very good educating session. And now it's time for break. I hope everyone enjoys the break, and we'll see you back at 15 hours CAT. And while on the break, why not try all our networking, try the networking hall and get in touch with Aja. Thank you. Have a good break.